I'm pretty much caught up now for BEC with the posting of the recording. So if you need to go ahead and look back at any of those, they should be there now. And I'm going to go ahead and jump us to what we had still for chapter B3, and we were on module 3. And remember, we were talking about the traditional overhead application process in which you have a single pool and you have a single driver to come up with a predetermined overhead rate. And that is the way that we apply our overhead costs to our work in progress, because our overhead costs are indirect costs and it's not particularly easy to trace those directly. And I don't see Eric on the screen here today, but he was interested. There he is. Just as I said that, here he comes. So Eric, you had asked about activity-based costing at that time, and that's what we're going to address now. And with activity-based costing, what we're going to see is we're going to have multiple pools and multiple layers that we will be dealing with. So let's just go ahead and take a look at some of that material here. And you can see that when we talk about our traditional costing system, which we learned earlier, get yourself in full screen here, guys. Okay, in a traditional costing system, we have a single pool with a single plant-wide overhead application rate, and then we come up with a single rate, and we use that to apply our overhead to our various jobs. And the common one that you see used quite a bit, particularly in textbooks, but also probably in practice, is direct hours or machine hours. There's no standard as to what the overhead driver needs to be, but it is traditional. We just have one driver, one pool. With activity-based costing, and once you just go ahead and write in, okay, with activity-based costing, we have multiple pools. Okay, and we have what? We have multiple drivers. I don't know what multiple is, some sort of dog, I guess. We have multiple drivers. Okay, and that will equal multiple rates. Now, the advantage of doing things this way is we're going to get a more precise look at how various products use certain resources of the entity, because not every resource has a single rate. So why don't you go ahead and flashcard that activity-based costing, we have multiple pools and multiple rates. Now, coming over and just taking a look at a couple of things about activity-based costing, and one thing that we've seen that the exam could try to do is try to trick you that it would only be used in a manufacturing entity, or it could only be used with job order process costing. No, it could be used both with job order or process costing, and it doesn't just have to be with a manufacturing entity. It could be with a service industry. And I'm not going to get into the example that they'll show us later, where they just say, for example, could be used by a hospital. But hospitals are probably entities that would want to use an activity-based costing system because of the various departments, and different departments have different resource needs than, say, other departments. Surgery is going to have different needs than, say, our outpatient part of our hospital. Okay, so when I teach managerial accounting at Stanford to the School of Medicine, I have a fairly sophisticated example where I go through and show how to use activity-based costing to allocate cost to hospitals in their Masters of Clinical Information Systems, where I teach there. We go through an example with activity-based costing there. Now, on our look here, we're going to go through an example that I think is a very good example, and we're going to be using activity-based costing for a manufacturing entity in this particular example. And we have one product can incur 150,000 direct labor hours, and the other product uses 45,000 direct labor hours. Now, Sort of the way they put this example together, we need to sort of, put some numbers together here. So the can product uses 150,000, and this is direct labor hours. The bottles uses what, 45,000? So we end up with a total of 195,000 direct labor hours that are being used. And okay, that's direct labor hours. I'm running out of room there. Gotta jump me to the next page for no reason. Okay, that's direct labor hours total. I'll just put it up here. Okay, now when we produce our units, we have 500,000 cans, 150,000 bottles, and then notice we start calling out drivers for the various activities. So notice we have what? We have multiple activities. Put the T before the L, multiple activities. And we have what? We have multiple drivers. Okay, so let's just go ahead and look at the drivers. We have pounds, 100,000 for cans, 60,000 for bottles. You could add those up. That gives you 160,000. We have number of production orders. Okay, 100 for each. That gives us a total 200. We have number of changes, 50 for cans. Interesting. Bottles, number of production orders, the changes. I can see right here we've got something interesting coming up, that the number of changes is pretty extensive for the bottles. And then you go ahead and you add machine hours together, and that gives us 230,000. Okay, and notice the cost associated here with these. So we have multiple pools, multiple drivers, and we're going to go ahead and take a look and contrast the traditional, okay, to the activity-based cost, which of course we're looking at here. So notice they pick up the same cost that we were seeing on the previous page. We bring those down. We total those up. Okay, that's 3,120,000. Okay, this is just like we did earlier in the chapter here last time. We have our total overhead costs, and then we divide it. In traditional, it's going to be divided by a single driver. And remember, I showed you that we have the 195,000 hours. Okay, that was coming from up there, right? 195,000. Direct labor hours, we come up with the one rate, okay, which is what we do in a traditional system, and the rate is $16 per direct labor hour. And you go ahead and you multiply now the hours that were used by the cans, which we got from the previous page right up there. Okay, we've got that multiplied out, and we applied 2,400,000 of our overhead costs based on direct labor hours to the cans. Since we made 500,000 cans, this thing's telling us it's $480 per can. Now we go ahead and the bottles use 45,000 times the 16, that's 720. And of course, this is a textbook, but the point is that we're basically saying that our cost per can versus our cost per bottle are identical. This entity would be indifferent as to how much factory capacity they use, at least looking at overhead, based on bottles versus cans here. Okay, now you come over, and what we do under activity-based costing, okay, is we're going to go ahead and we're going to come up with a rate per activity. So remember, we said that we had cost of 480 up here, okay, and we had the 160. So we go ahead and we divide the 480 by the 160, and we come up with a rate for materials handling. For orders, the cost was 90. You can kind of see it there, but I'm just go ahead and be annoying and scroll back up to the original table. 90 divided by the 200 hours, or 200, production orders. And so that's not material handling, though. That's number of production orders. The 90,000, I divide the 90,000 by the 200 orders, 450. The changes were what? The changes were $250,000, and there were 250 changes. So the changes are pretty expensive. The changes is a fairly expensive activity. It uses $1,000 per change, and then we go ahead and we come up with an amount for the machine hours. And I go back up the table. I think you're getting the point now, right? Okay, so now we go through and we say, okay, well, how much of the material handling is used by the cans? And it's what? It's 100,000 pounds used up by the cans. So now we take that rate and we multiply the $3, okay, for the cans. We do it for the bottles. Okay, production orders were 450 each, and it was 100 for each of those. I'm not going to go back and look at that because that was 100 for each of those. So I think that's pretty easy. We pick up that 440, 450 per change, okay, or per order, I should say. Okay, then we get into the changes. Okay, and notice here, this is a big deal that the cans only use 50 changes at 1,000, but the bottles use what? Use 200 changes. So that's a fairly expensive activity. Okay, that's using up quite a bit of our resources here, right? So notice that the bottles get a much higher allocation there, and then machine hours for the bottles, it's the 80,000, 150,000 machine hours, I should say, times the $10 versus the 80,000 for the bottles. Okay, so now we come up with a different result as to the amount of overhead costs that's applied to each one of these products. And when we go ahead and divide those by the number of product, the cans are much cheaper, at least when you look at overhead, for us to make than are the bottles. And so this entity would have much better information in deciding how much of their factory resources, their factory capacity, do they want to use for bottles versus cans. Okay, now you can sit here and you say, wow, okay, then I'm going to go in and I'm going to talk to people about using activity-based costing. Hang on, Tiger. Trying to get people to buy into a more sophisticated process like this is not always the easiest thing. And you can get as sophisticated with activity-based costing as you want. We're looking at overhead here, but I've seen examples of where entities are very granular about their direct cost, and they track every single direct cost very, very tightly, and allows them, and it's more of an operations management discussion, in my opinion, than an accounting discussion at that point, as they start to look at how different activities, both overhead and direct, both indirect and direct, are using up resources and look for opportunities for efficiencies and whatnot. The one example that I looked at, it was a hospital in Nepal that they had looked at how they could lower the cost of cataract surgery by finding the more expensive parts of the cataract surgery and then pulling in some of those costs. Now, admittedly, that example was really looking more at direct costs, and where they really save money is on the lenses, which is a direct cost versus an indirect cost. And then they were doing some things that, in my opinion, would never fly in the United States. For example, they were reusing gloves between patients by simply sanitizing the gloves rather than changing the gloves. They were doing things like having a doctor work on 2 patients at the same time in essentially a very small area. And again, with COVID and whatnot, I don't see that all of that would necessarily, fly in the U.S., but it is something that the U.S. probably needs to start thinking more about, as we have an aging population. Are there ways to reduce some of those costs, or at least get into a position as to where we're being more precise with how we're allocating our costs to various activities? Okay, good. Any question? Okay, good. Let's go ahead then and let's take a look at service cost allocation now. Okay, And notice they mention here that hospitals may want to do something like this because we have different departments, such as housekeeping, that we have to allocate the different service department costs to our different departments, say in a hospital. Now, the direct method, they tell us, is the most widely used. And under the direct method, each service department's total costs are allocated to the production departments without recognizing that service departments themselves may use other service departments. Now, as I think I've mentioned in here, I was a housekeeper in a hospital for several years when I was completing school and stuff. And almost everybody in the hospital uses housekeeping. The only department that for some reason didn't use housekeeping was engineering. And every now and then they would ask us to go into the engineering and kill evil creatures that had grown into the facilities there because they never got cleaned. But for the most part, everybody in the hospital uses housekeeping. Now, a step down method says, well, look, engineering is a service department. Now I'm blowing up my own example. Engineering is a service department, but so is housekeeping. And sometimes housekeeping needs to use the services of engineering, or more rarely, sometimes engineering uses the services of housekeeping. So under the step down method, what will happen is we will allocate service department costs to other service department as well as the production. Okay, and again, as we've said, the most commonly used, and put that on your flashcard too, by the way, guys, the most commonly used is the single direct method versus the step down method. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at this example, pretty good little example here. And we have the Remington Company has two production departments, Division A and Division B. Okay, there they are. The company has two service departments, the information system and the human resources. Okay, so information system, human resources, and then the most recently operating year, the information system used 2,220,000 and the HR used 975. Okay, now when we take a look at these two service departments, HC and HR, we come up with, again, driver for each of those. We're using multiple drivers, right? And for the IS department, information system, it's computing hours. Now let's do like we did last time. Let's just add those together. That's what, 15,000 hours of computing time. And then applications, performance appraisals, I guess not applications, but performance appraisals is what HR is using. We go ahead and we add those together. That's a total of 5,000 applications. Okay, so we will use those to figure out how much of these relative costs will we apply to the production departments A and B, depending on how much of that they use. So we come over and we have what? We have our 15,000 hours coming from up there. Okay, we got our 15,000 hours. The cost was what? The cost was 2,200,000 for the IS department, right? Okay, so we come over and we come up with $148 per hour for the computing hours for the planning and activity reporting for the IS department. And then for the human resources department, right, cost was 975 divided by the 5,000 appraisal, give me 195 per appraisal. And then we just look to see what the two production divisions A and B. A did what? A used 9,000. B used 6,000. So we go ahead and for department A, we use the 9, we use the 6, we pick up the 148. All right. Okay, and we've applied that cost for the appraisals, which were at 195. And again, just peeking back up to remind ourselves, HR used 28, Division B used 2,200. Okay, so we go ahead and apply that to 195, right? And we have now applied the appraisal cost for the HR to the Division A, Division B, and we now have our totals. Okay, now what the second example is here is the step down method. And what we're going to discover here, let's just go ahead and read this a little bit, assume the same facts, okay? But the exception is that the information system also uses the service of the human resources department, specifically, okay, performance appraisals administered by the HR department to the IS department result in an additional 200 appraisals during the recent operating year. Okay, then they say further, assume because of data privacy issues, the HR department used an outside contract or whatever, because that's because they didn't want to get into multiple steps. But let's just go ahead and let's take a look. And just as we've seen with the performance appraisals, okay, 2,800 for Division A, 2,200 for Division B. That hasn't changed, but now we're going to sit here and we're going to have to deal with these additional appraisals, the 200 additional. Okay, so we still have what? We still have the, I guess I could put plus 200 here. Okay, that's going to yield us what? The 5,200. We pick up that same cost that we had, the 975, but notice we get a different number now. It's 187.50 per appraisal, because now, as opposed to that 195 or the 195 per appraisal we had before up here, because now we're considering the fact that we have a 200 additional appraisals from the IS department's additional 200 appraisal. Now you come over and we will take that cost now and apply it to the 200 appraisals that are going to the IT from the HR department. Okay, and then we go ahead and we take the total for the IT, and it's not only the 2,200,000 we saw in the first example, but now we're bringing in that additional 37,500. Divide that by the 15,000 hours that were used as the driver for IT. Okay, and then we go ahead and we apply that rate, that 150.5. And we go ahead for the 9,000 hours, 134. And then we pick up that appraisal for the number of appraisals. Remember, the big difference there for that appraisal was that because we added in the additional 200 appraisals, the cost per appraisal went down. And you go ahead and apply that 150.50 to the 6,000, 2,200 appraisals, and you've gone ahead and you have used the step down method, where we apply service department cost to other service departments. Question. Okay, good. Let's talk about joint product costing. Okay, now what happens? Okay, in byproduct, but we're really focusing on joint products here. Joint products are two or more products that are generated from a common input. So let's just use a silly example. Let's say we're talking about Nike, and Nike has running shoes and they have basketball shoes. Well, what happens? Up to a point, you probably can't distinguish the running shoe from the basketball shoe. There's both some rubber and some cloth. Okay, whatever. Okay, then what happens? Then at some point you will split off and you'll start putting things in that are specific to the running shoe versus the basketball shoe. So how do we allocate the costs that are common to these two different byproducts? Joint products. Now, byproducts are smaller products that come off
of the joint product. And the genius that I think I see, if you ever go to the Nike store, you get up towards the counter and they start selling you those little Nike swoosh balls that you can squeeze while you're running or something like that. And let's just go ahead and pretend like that's a byproduct. I don't know if it is or not, but let's just say that might be a byproduct. Okay. And split off is the point where we start being able to distinguish, hey, we're putting in materials and whatnot that are specific to a basketball shoe versus a running shoe. That's the split off point. Okay. Now, what we're going to see is that you could have these joint products, or the two products, the basketball shoes and the running shoes, and then separable costs are costs that start to go in after that split off. Now, these are the costs that we're tracking that are specifically related to, say, basketball versus running shoe. Okay. So our job here is to say, well, the costs that are joint costs that go in before split off, how do we allocate them to the two products? Now, when you look at this, they tell us that we can do it by unit volume. Okay, you could do these costs by unit volume. So we have simple manufacturing produces two products, A and B. Direct costs associated with the manufacturing of product B were 25,000 and product A were 25,000, product B 50,000. Okay, the joint costs are 10,000. Now, when I see the joint cost, guys, in these kinds of questions, I take that number and I write it down somewhere, because I know that's my job, is to sit here and allocate those costs. Now, if you're using unit volume and they're telling you that product A used 10 gallons of this joint cost that had gone in before the split off, and the other one, just following volume, is using 20,000 gallons, we've got a total of 30,000 gallons. And then you simply use whatever that ratio is of gallons used by the various products to allocate that 10,000 number that we would have already written down. And then sometimes a question might call out one of the products and tell you the total cost, and don't make the mistake of just including the amount of the joint costs that were allocated. You would also pick up any direct costs associated with those two products, the 25,000 for product A, the 50,000 for product B. Okay. Now, that's pretty straightforward. Another way to do this is to allocate joint costs based on sales value at split off, assuming the product has a sales value at split off. Okay, so now we're sitting here and we have what? And the first thing I look for, what are the joint costs? I always remind myself, I got to know what those joint costs are. I know I'm going to use that because that's the thing I'm allocating. So that's always the key point in there. Okay. Now here they tell us that you have 100 units of A, and that could be sold at $20 per unit. You have 400 units of B, and that could be sold at $15 per unit. So they go ahead and they extend that out. 100 units of A at $20, $400 of 400 units of B at $15. That's a total sales value. If I were to sell them right now, before I'm really done with them, I could get what? I could get a total of 8,000. And then you go ahead and 2,000 of that is attributed to product A, 6,000 of that is attributed to product B. And again, we pick up our joint costs that we're trying to allocate here, and we've gone ahead and allocated those costs. Now, what happens if a product does not have a value at split off? Okay, what we're going to need to do is figure out, well, what will it ultimately sell for? What will be its sales value? Ultimately, its final sales price right there. And we go ahead and we subtract any additional costs that we're going to continue to incur as we process this further. That gives you what? The sales value at split off. These sales value at split off, right? And then we'll go ahead and allocate our cost based on whatever that sales value at split off was. So why don't you go ahead and flashcard that, Okay, and let's just take a look at, again, this sort of example where we are going to pick up, the first thing we're going to do is see what is the joint cost. That's the first thing I look for in any one of these questions, and the joint cost is given to me pretty quickly here. In this particular example, 30,000. I pick that number up, I write it down. Now I'm just focusing on how do I come up with the ratio? And they tell me in the problem that they will ultimately someday, not right now, but someday, once they're finished processing this, they will be able, okay, it's just a little bit annoying for me because every time I look up, I'm not in shot. I don't know why that bothers me, but it does. Okay, and so what happens? We would ultimately be able to sell this for $25 per unit. Okay, 1,600 units is what they had in this example, and they will ultimately be able to sell the product G. Okay, we got product F, product G here, at $50 per unit. There's 800 units of those. So this is a little annoying that they come up with the same number, 40,000 for each of those, but that's okay. And then they tell me the cost needed to convert the products into saleable form where we can ultimately sell them, because we're not gonna be able to sell them for 40,000 yet. It's later that we can sell them at 16,000 and 24,000 for product F and G respectively. Okay, this is beyond the split off. So 16,000 for F, 24,000 for G. That means that they have a net realizable value after we continue to process them, 24 and 16 respectively. This annoying 40,000 comes up again. It's not the same 40,000. That's the total of the net realizable value. We go ahead and we do what? We divide the respective amounts for each one of those, right? 24,000, the 16,000 over here, and we go ahead and we allocate the cost that way. Okay, so not too bad, guys. I mean, I think that a lot of this stuff tends to be actually kind of maybe I'm twisted, but it seems a little bit fun to me to sit here and go through some of these problems. You'll get pretty good at these. It's going to be more of the same on that next one, so I'm not going to go through that last example. Now, byproducts. Okay, remember that's the swoosh balls, and there's a couple of things you could do. You could say, hey, any proceeds from byproducts will be used to reduce the joint cost number. So you'll take that joint cost number, you'll subtract off whatever's going to come in from those joint products, those little swoosh balls, and that'll be the number that you allocate. Alternatively, you could go ahead and just count those up as miscellaneous revenue. So why don't you flashcard those two alternatives for the byproduct. Question. Okay, good. Let's go ahead and let's try our first multiple choice question for tonight. I'll go ahead and launch the poll for you. Give me a couple of minutes on that. Okay, guys, we're at about 2 minutes. Okay, not the best result we've had. The answer here is C. So the largest number of students that chose an answer was C. But let's just go ahead and take a look at this one. Okay, now what they're saying to us is that a manufacturing company, okay, 1 second, I can stop sharing that poll. Okay, what we're saying here is a manufacturing company has several product lines. Traditionally, it has allocated manufacturing costs between product lines based on total machine hours. Okay, for each product line. They're coming up with this activity-based costing system, and they're saying of these that are listed in the choices, which one will have to have a new cost driver assigned to it? In other words, not machine hours anymore. So get ready, guys. Here come some questions. Do you think machines use electricity?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well then, if that's the case, then we probably don't need a new driver for our electricity expense, because the machines probably use electricity. Do you think machines require repair and maintenance?
Yes.
Yeah, so machine hours probably make sense there. Okay. How about depreciation expense? Do you think machines are depreciated?
Yes.
So machines make sense there. Employee benefit expense, we have what? We have lots of different employees. Some of them maybe are involved in the machines, but some of them are maybe, accounting staff. We could have some that are HR staff. We could have some folks that aren't even involved in machines. Maybe they're involved in design of the product, that sort of thing. Okay, so employee benefit expense we might want to use, I don't know. You could use the direct labor dollars there that are associated with something to allocate employee benefit expense. Okay, but you probably want to come up with something different than machine hours there. Okay, good. Let's go ahead and let's take a look at this question. Okay, we're at 2 minutes. I'm going to give you a little more time here.
I'll give you 15 seconds. Okay, guys, let's look at this one. I'm going to end the poll at 2 minutes and 30 seconds. This is a question that really should take you in the neighborhood of maybe a minute to work on the exam, maybe a minute and a half. Okay, so I'm just giving you that sense because this is a pretty straightforward question that as you start to practice more with these, you should be able to work these pretty quickly. Okay, but let's go ahead and I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to share the results with you. And you can see that 67% of us pick C, which is the correct answer. Okay, let me share the results. Okay. Okay, good. Now let's just go ahead and let's look at this. Now, the way to do this, the first thing you want to do is, well, what am I working with? And notice in some of the examples in the book, they gave us the joint cost at the beginning. Here, they put it at the end of the question. So I'm going to look for those joint costs. I'm going to write them down because I know I have to apply them. And they say, and they just ask us for one here, this AJAC. Okay, now I like this example because the exam always does this too. They write things in the reverse order of how it would be very apparent as to how to use the information to answer the question, because we're going to have to come up with that net realizable value after split off. And so we need to know that the ultimate sales value minus the separable cost will give us that net realizable value after we are able to finally finish processing this and sell it. So we go ahead and for AJAC, it's 8,000. For BJAC, it's 22,000. We go ahead and we come up then with that net realizable value, which is going to be 72,000 for AJAC. And 18,000 for this BJAC. So we got a total of what, 90,000. So that's going to be in the denominator here. And for the numerator, we pick up what? We pick up, since they asked us about AJAC, right? We pick up the cost associated with AJAC of 72,000. We go ahead and we apply, and we get the 48,000 would go to AJAC, the product they asked us for. Question. I mean, if I can talk through it to you, and I think that was probably less than a minute that I just used to describe that, you can work it that fast. Okay. Okay, good. Let's come over and let's take a look at our module 4, and we're going to start to get into performance management. And we're going to have two parts to this. The first part is largely definitional. I'm going to show you some various tools to measure performance, and then we're going to start to get into some ratio analysis to measure, and most of it is looking at things like how our profitability will indicate what sort of return we're getting for various investments, both debt, stock, assets, that sort of thing. Okay, so we'll look at those in the next module, probably after the break here. But let's go ahead and let's take a look here at, and there are financial measures, which we'll get into in the next module. But here we're looking at non-financial measures. Okay, and we start with this notion of productivity, and it's defined as the measure of the ratio of output achieved into the inputs of production. Okay, so this could be measured using, pounds, that sort of thing is going to be how we will look at our measure of our productivity. Okay, now productivity is a measure that is derived from the actual performance compared to other organizations over time. So we don't want to be the most inefficient company out there, and so we might compare our productivity to other entities. sometimes you hear productivity talked about on a countrywide level, right? Okay. Now, there are two types that are used. One is total factor productivity ratios. The other is partial. Okay. Now, go ahead and flashcard these two types, which are sort of trumpeted there, and then, called out here. So you can flashcard the two types, partial and full. Okay. Now, what happens, or total, I should say, when we look at partial, okay, and include on your flashcard that calls out partial is one of the partial is the most frequently used productivity measure. Okay. And what we're going to do is see that we will pick whatever factor goes into most accounts for the product, and we'll just use that one to figure out our productivity versus trying to more granularly measure smaller inputs and measure our productivity there. So that's why it's more commonly used. Okay, the partial, which is going to call out the major one. So let's just look at this example on the next page. And we have this garden furnishing, produces outdoor garden sculptures, oh boy, for high-end niche market. Okay, each garden sculpture manufactured by the company includes two raw materials, plastic being the largest. Okay, since that's the largest, when we sit here and we use our partial, we would use that one. Okay. And then the other one is cement. Cement is part of it, but not nearly as much. Okay, so we got these high-end, mostly plastic garden sculptures. Okay, and materials priced at time of production were $125 per pound for the plastic and $175 per pound for the cement. Okay, and so we want to go ahead now. If we're using partial, okay, we're just going to do what? We're going to sit there and we'll say, well, we're using 20,000 pounds of plastic right there. So we're just going to use the plastic. Okay, so we have 1,000 units and we're using 20,000 pounds of plastic. That means we use 0.05 amount of plastic per product. Okay, now that is what we'll use for partial. For the total, okay, now we're going to go ahead and we're going to have to weight appropriately each of those inputs. And as you can imagine, companies probably use the first one more because there could be a lot of different things that'll go in to a product, and you start really giving yourself a record keeping burden if you're going to keep track of them and have to weight them all accordingly. But what we did here is we said, well, look, 1,000 garden sculptures, and it used what? 20,000 pounds of plastic at $1.25, 5,000 pounds of cement at $1.75. So now we take the 1,000 sculptures and divide it by the total of the resources, and that gives you the amount of the cost per units of output per dollars of input. Okay, so yes, total is obviously going to be more precise, but is it worth those additional steps that we have to go through and the additional information that we have to track in order to be able to do a total? Okay, now internal benchmark techniques, and these again are really tools that we can use to sort of measure how we are measuring against some sort of benchmark that we've set up to monitor our own standards that we have imposed on ourselves as we develop a product. Okay, so control chart. Okay, and control chart is kind of interesting in that it shows whether there's a trend towards improved quality or deteriorating quality. So you take a look at this example, this control chart over here, and this company has set an average of 10, and these are defects on, I guess it's tires or something, right? And what they want to do is they want to try to drive those defects down. And they certainly don't want them up over that upper limit. But notice we also set a lower limit. And you sit here and say, well, why would you set a lower limit? Wouldn't you want it to be just zero? Okay. And the answer is, well, there's a cost associated with having absolutely no defects. And so maybe we're going to say, hey, we don't want to be that perfect, okay, because there's a cost associated with that. And we want to hover more around that average. Okay. Now you come over and they say, let's to further extrapolate the results. Assume the company's machine makes batches of tires consisting of 10,000 truck tires per batch. Given management's historical experience with production line, the company has set an upper limit of 15 tires per batch. The company also established a lower end rate of $5, as any amount set lower could result in machine breakdowns and repairs, whatever. We're just trying to get too perfect there, right? Okay. Now, I don't entirely agree with the analysis here. I'm kind of like, well, I don't know about that. The results graphically displayed in the control chart above indicate that the individual tire production batches intervals all fall within the 15 upper and 5 lower limit. That's true. Specification for production. Furthermore, the pattern of production shows a general decline in defects. Okay, yeah, it does as we hover towards that lower limit for produced for each subsequent monthly time interval. The very last batch, number 8, they tell me is an outlier with more tire defects 11 than the average of 10. And I'm like, I don't see it as an outlier. I don't see no outlier there. Okay, but if they want to say that it's an outlier, okay, I guess I'll accept that. Okay, but I would be watching that, you know, we were down, we were getting close to that lower limit. We came back up towards that average. Okay, I guess maybe it's an outlier for the last several batches, but then again, we were kind of more up around there for those 4 batches up there. I don't know. I'd keep an eye on that, but whatever. Maybe I'm making the point of this example is that then you would go ahead and you would sort of continue to watch that. Okay. Okay, good. We come over and we also have something called a Pareto diagram. I think Pareto is the name of the guy who came up with it. Okay. And it is a way of tracking what are the causes of the defects. Okay. So when you look at this here, you're probably going to deal with what type 1 defect before you're worried about type 6 defect, or maybe type 6 defect is an easy fix and you just go ahead and, you know, knock that one out right away. Okay, and then you maybe come back towards some of these more common causes of defects. I was on an assignment where we were looking at what were non-compliance findings that were called out on single audits of housing agencies. And we did this pretty extensive analysis where we went through the single audit reports done by independent auditors of housing agencies. And I say we at GAO, because our point was that HUD should be doing that. HUD should understand the type of non-compliance findings that are called out in the mandatory audit reports of housing agencies and be tracking them by type, and then addressing the problems that most commonly cause non-compliance. And I wanted to present our findings in a Pareto diagram, but I was overruled on that. They decided that they didn't like the Pareto diagram. I think it's because they didn't understand it. I think it's a very effective tool for helping you to visually show what is causing defects. Okay. Okay, good. Now you come over and you could also use a cause and effect diagram called a fishbone. And they're going to call it a fishbone because it looks like a fish. Okay, and we'll see in the bones of a fish. So we'll take a look at that here in a couple seconds. But cause and effect diagram provide a framework for managers to analyze the problem that contribute to the occurrence of defects. Okay, and we can use
a fishbone diagram to identify the sources of problems in the production process by resource and then take corrective action. Okay, so flashcard what a fishbone diagram does for us. But you know, you look at this and it's pretty apparent why they call it fishbone, in that we go ahead and we look at the different things, okay, that will lead to problems, okay, and then we can start to address these factors that would lead to defects accordingly. Okay, good. Let's look at financial scorecards and let's look at responsibility segments. Okay, and there are different types of responsibility segments. Okay, sometimes I see them called responsibility centers. Okay, here they're calling them strategic business units. So you see different terms, but go ahead and flashcard the different responsibility segments, strategic business units, put on there that those are synonymous terms. I'm trying to underline that. Okay, and let's go ahead and flashcard these. Okay, so one is a cost strategic business unit and their responsibilities for controlling costs. Revenue responsibility centers, strategic business units are responsible for generating revenues. Okay, coming over to the next page, okay, continuing that flashcard, okay, we could have profit strategic business units, and they are going to be responsible, what do you think? For profit means that they will both be controlling both revenue and cost, and then we have investment segment units that are going to be responsible for generating a return on assets invested. Okay, now you come over and we can really do this in a grid manner, and that you have the segments, but then you can also look at these by product line, geographic areas, customer, etc. Okay, now what we will use to analyze these are our strategic business units. Okay, and we are going to be looking at their contribution margin. Okay, contribution margin is the excess of revenue over variable costs. So we are interested, when we say contribution margin, guys, contribution margin first covers fixed cost. And then what? We are interested in anything that will then next second will go cover what? Desired profits of the entity. Okay, that's where we look at contribution margin. Okay, now very important. Let's just take a look. And when we look at our contribution margin, okay, which are going to be going first towards fixed costs, controllable fixed costs are costs that managers can influence in less than 1 year. Okay, those are controllable fixed costs, such as advertising and promotion, flashcard that. We also have common costs, okay, and managers have control over variable costs and over controllable fixed costs, okay. Financial scorecards that use contribution reporting factor in these costs. Common costs are not controllable, and therefore the flashcard common costs are not controllable, so never allocate uncontrollable costs when evaluating. That says evaluating SBU. It's not right. If you take non-controllable common costs, okay, synonymous term, okay, common costs are not controllable,
you're going to start making bad decisions, because what will happen is you say, well, look at this segment after you've allocated the non-controllable costs, they have a negative, operating income, but getting rid of them won't get rid of the non-controllable costs. Okay, so you don't want to do that. You come up with an analysis that maybe will have you getting rid of a segment that's contributing to the overall profitability of the company. So you don't want that. Now, I say that, and notice I say when evaluating, because you could see some sort of arbitrary accounting allocation to those costs, which might be used for some sort of requirements for segment reporting or something like that. We're talking internal analysis here, okay, of the various operating strategic business units, whatever. So we come over and we have these different regions, okay? And of course, the variable cost would be traceable. We have the contribution margin. Then, yeah, we go ahead and we allocate the controllable cost accordingly and look at region 4. Okay, region 4 is sort of the takeaway here. This is, a controllable margin of 50. That's going to contribute now to all of these non-controllable fixed costs, right? And then they arbitrarily would go ahead and allocate somehow the non-controllable cost to the product line, and it makes to the various regions, I should say here. And it makes it look like region 4 is a dog, when in fact, region 4 is contributing more to the uncontrollable cost than any other regions. So that's why you would not want to allocate the non-controllable cost. You can come up with a distortion like that. Okay. Okay, balance scorecard. And when we are looking at balance scorecard as accountants, we tend to think financial outcome. Well, there are more than just financial outcomes, performance indicators of critical success that an entity would want to consider. So yeah, financial, but maybe we're trying to be coming up with some sort of internal business processes that are going to be considered innovative, customer satisfaction, advancements, innovation, human resources development, learning and growth. All of these could be objectives of an entity. Okay, so when we look, we would come up and we would say, well, what is our strategy here? Okay, we have 4 strategic goals. Okay, capturing additional market, manufacturing low cost, becoming a price leader, and linking strategy with reward and recognition. Okay, and then we go ahead and we start to take those various things that we're trying to accomplish, and we sit here and we put them into the categories that we flashcarded on the previous page. And the big deal here, guys, is, well, what is your critical success factor? Okay, so if you are trying to be the low cost leader here, which is what they've done here, they go ahead and they have identified anticipating customer needs before competitors. And I don't know that I agree with that as a critical success factor for being a low price leader, but okay. I mean, whatever. The point is, the flashcard on the previous page is that when you are coming up with a balanced scorecard, right, these different, critical success factors would be grouped into financial, international business, internal business processes, customer satisfaction, advancement, and innovation. I'm not sure that the rest of this table is the best example Becker's ever come up with. Okay. Okay, good. Let's look at cost of quality. Okay, and when we look at cost of quality, we have conformance cost. Conformance cost can be listed as prevention and appraisal. Okay, now prevention costs include, and let's go ahead and flashcard the prevention cost: employee training, inspection, preventative maintenance, redesign of product, redesign of processes, searching for a higher quality suppliers. Okay. Now, when we look at our appraisal cost, okay, this is seeing how we're doing against these benchmarks. Okay. Appraisal costs are put in to discover the cause of defects. So statistical quality checks, testing, inspection, machine maintenance, I should say, of a laboratory. Okay, so go ahead and flashcard those conformance costs, those that are both prevention and appraisal. Okay, now non-conforming costs is what happens if we don't meet our goals of quality, whatever it is. Okay, so cost of non-conformance with quality standards are classified as internal and external. Okay, so flashcard that. Also flashcard that non-conformance costs are often difficult to measure because sometimes we just lose a customer, right? I don't know if I should disclose all this. I was at a restaurant and I didn't like some things that happened. And I called the owner over and said, hey, you know, this was great, but I didn't like that. And my friend was like, well, why did you have to say that? I'm like, so the guy knows. Would it be better if I stopped coming here? No. Okay, so you'd probably, you know, have a problem that a lot of times customers just walk on you, right? Okay, good. Now we come over and we have what? We have internal failure, our because both internal and external, are the costs to cure the defect discovered before the product is sent to the customer. Okay, these costs include, okay, let's flashcard that. You find the defect, so what do? Rework. Sometimes you got to throw stuff away. Sometimes you're going to have to fix the machinery that's causing the defect. Cost of disposal, cost of lost unit, okay, the cost of the thing that you've spoiled, right? The downtime. Okay, now we come over, and external failure costs include, hey, you know, we're having so much failure, the only way we're going to get people to buy our stuff is we start warranting our product, right? So you have warranty cost, cost of a customer returning, liability claims. Hey, you know, tire, we have the example of tires, a tire blows up, could cause an accident, right? Lost customers, re-engineering, and external failure, whatever that means exactly, I'm not sure, but just go ahead and flashcard it as external. Okay, and they give us a mnemonic. I'm not going to bother with the mnemonic here, guys. We've flashcarded, but they can be internal, external, and then you know, the nature of those, which are appraisal and prevention. And then we have what? And then we have the for our prevention costs, appraisal and prevention costs, for our conformance cost. For our non-conformance cost, we have what? Internal and external, and then we have the nature of those. So we flashcarded all that. We don't need a mnemonic for it, just flashcard it. Okay, good. So let's come over and let's take a look at a couple more multiple choice questions, and then we'll be able to take a break. Okay, stop, guys, because two of you have picked D for some strange reason. And we're talking about prevention and appraisal cost, okay? And you start looking at that, and I guess D is all the choices. And obviously you haven't prevented something if you have to rework it. Okay, so don't rush. I'm giving you plenty of time to work this. Look at it carefully, understand the concept, and apply it. And there goes another choice for D. Are you trying to make me mad? Okay, guys, I've given you more time than I should have on this one. I'm not sure, maybe because I mentioned that the break is coming. Everyone ran out to the break. Because I'm only getting 8 out of the 11 participants here, but you take a look and you know, I don't think we had a real good result on this. Let's just look at it. Listed below are selected line items, and they want to know which is the prevention and appraisal. So if you have to rework something, have you prevented anything from bad from happening?
No.
It happened, and now you got to fix it, right? Okay. Equipment maintenance is making sure that you don't have the equipment all of a sudden, you know, start malfunctioning and crush a bunch of good materials, right? Okay, so yeah, that's a what? That is a prevention cost. You got to pick that one up. Okay. How about product testing? Okay, you test the product to prevent whatever the bad thing is that's going to be happening. So yeah, that is. How about product repair? If you have to repair something, have you prevented anything from happening? No. Okay. Okay, so that was just a matter of picking those. What did I do wrong here?
Didn't you say not to choose D?
Yeah, you said not to choose D.
Yeah, but I was wrong, wasn't I? So what is Watson's total? Oh, I see what I did wrong. I misread the question. You're right, guys. Because it's what? Prevention and appraisal, and I got locked in on what? Prevention. My bad. Okay, it happens. Okay, I know very few people that get 100% on the CPA exam, and I certainly wasn't one of them. Okay, so yeah, all of these would be prevention and appraisal. My bad. I apologize. Now I see why somebody kept picking it. Good for you, despite what I was saying. You were
Well,
right.
isn't D only the sum of equipment maintenance and product testing?
Say what?
D is just equipment maintenance plus product testing. It's only the 1,154 plus 786.
You said you mean C?
No, D.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, so it is just prevention, because we work in product repair would fall under the internal and external failures, wouldn't they?
Oh, right. Okay. Sorry, guys. Yeah, I'm having problems here with this. I didn't give myself very good notes on this. Yeah, prevention and appraisal. Rework is not prevention. I see. And product repair is not prevention. So I was describing it correctly. I just didn't do my math right. That's what you're telling me, Michael? That it was
Yeah.
1940?
Yeah, at least that's what I got.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, guys. My bad. Erase that. I see what I did wrong. Sorry. It happens. E1. Okay, Lord E1. It's an error. Okay, yeah. I screwed up there because I didn't add those correctly, and then I got myself lost in trying to figure out why D, because then I looked at my note and I, wait a minute, I have D as the answer here. Yeah, because those two. So I described it right correctly. It's just that I didn't add my numbers up correctly. I wasn't eyeballing that properly. Okay. Okay, good. Let's move on. Sorry about that. Let's look at number 2 here. Okay, looks like most of us have had a chance to look at this one, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. We're coming up on the 2 minutes, and good. Most of us got this one right. Okay, so they want us to call out what our internal failure costs. Okay, and you start to look, and if you have to rework, yeah, that's going to be an internal failure cost because you got to fix that before it is sent out. Responding to customer complaints is going to be what? An external, okay, non-conforming cost, and statistical quality control procedures are what? Those are conforming costs, and so that is not going to be part of internal failure because those are what? Those are non-conforming costs. So A is the correct answer. Okay, highly definitional stuff, guys. We put a lot of flashcards on those, so that's the strategy for getting through those. Okay, what we're going to do is take the break now, and then we're going to come back and start to talk about some performance measurement, performance management, part 2, but we're going to be focusing more on financial measures now than some of the non-financial things that we were just looking at a minute ago. Okay, so let's just go ahead and take a break. I'm showing 6:25. Let's come back at 6:35, and we will continue on, finish up chapter 3 here. I'm going to pause the recording. Someone please remind me to start that up again when we come back. Okay, good. All right, so let's go ahead and let's start to take a look at some more performance management measures, really focusing more on the financial aspects now. And we're going to start to look at really
a discussion as to some various ratio that will be helpful to evaluate the performance here, to manage the performance. As you know, I'm not a huge fan of spending a lot of time on ratio, but I think there's a couple of insights that are useful for us to look at here for these particular discussion together. Okay, so let's just go ahead and let's talk about return on investment. Okay, and return on investment, okay, could be your net income divided by your investment capital or profit margin times investment turnover. Now, the reason we sort of give it to you in these two alternatives is maybe there's a question that'll give you the profit margin and then the investment turnover. And you just need to multiply those as opposed to being stuck because you're saying, well, they're not giving me the income, they're not giving me invested capital. How can I come up with the ROI? Well, if they give you those two other ratio, you could do that. Now, it is worth noting here, okay, the return on investment, right? And if you were to take out the common items here, just using, some math here, you would have income divided by what? Investment capital, which is basically what we showed you up there. But maybe they will be a little funky with you and give you the ability to calculate, say the investment turnover and give you the profit margin as a percentage. Well, then you'd have to know to spring into action for that question to go ahead and calculate your investment turnover, which is your sales divided by your invested capital. Okay, so flashcard it both ways. Hopefully they would just give you the income and the invested capital, and then you got a pretty easy way to calculate return on investment. Okay, now you come over and you take a look at this example, and here they told us assume that sales are $1 million, net income is 40,000, invested capital is 250,000, and here they asked me to figure out the ROI. Well, look, I could just do it right there by taking what? By taking the 40,000, dividing it by the 250,000. What's the amount of the invested capital? The 250,000 of the invested capital, and I can come up with the answer that way as well, right? Okay, so you don't have to necessarily do it this long way that they talked about, because you're really kind of wasting your time doing it that way. If I'm on the exam, I would just go ahead and pick the numbers that I need for the direct ROI as opposed to having to calculate the asset turnover and the other factor there, which is the profit margin. Okay, good. Come over and let's take a look at return on assets, guys. And again, sometimes I don't have a lot to say about these. You got a flashcard on. Return on assets is net income divided by total average assets. I think you know this, but total average assets is beginning of year assets plus what? Plus end of year assets. And since there's two numbers in the denominator, in the numerator, there's two numbers, so in the denominator we do what? Divide by 2 to get the average. Okay. Now, when we are looking at the assets, there are different measures. Okay, asset valuations. Let's just look at that. Use in ROI, and ROA computations affect the results. The appropriate asset valuation depends on the strategic objectives of the company. Okay, so let's just look at some different things that could be used, and you can flashcard these, although they're pretty obvious. In fact, yeah, flashcard them, but they're pretty obvious, but I want you to flashcard them. But you really just need to read the directions of the question and see what they're telling you management has chosen to use for these. Okay, again, these are more internal measures, so there isn't a whole heck of a lot of standard that goes along with this in terms of, there's no law that says you have to calculate it using, you could use net book value, You could use gross book value, okay, which doesn't consider depreciation. Net book value does. What would it cost me to replace the assets at this point in time? There's some sort of inflation. The cost of things are going up, like we're currently experiencing. Replacement cost might make sense. Liquidation value, which is what I could sell it for at this point in time. Okay. Now, some limitations. And yeah, I'm going to have you flashcard this because, again, the exam loves to ask about risks and benefits, risk rewards, pros and cons, right? Especially the BEC section of the exam, which would have a written communication task-based simulation. So let's just flashcard these. And one is that there's a short-term focus. Use of ROI exclusively as a measure of performance can inadvertently focus management purely on maximizing short-term return, and overemphasis on investment return targets is referred to as investment myopia. Okay, so you can flashcard some of those terms. Disincentive to invest is another limitation, in that what? If I go ahead and invest, I'm going to increase that denominator. That's going to draw that percentage down. So I don't want to invest, particularly near the end of the year, right? And so that might cause a company to, a manager, I should say, to really drift away from a potentially good investment because they're worried about ROI. Okay, now we start to get into return on equity here, and then the DuPont model. Okay, and return on equity is pretty easy, guys. I don't have a lot to say there. Equity, which is whatever our stockholders' equity is, assets minus liabilities. Okay, maybe that's worth noting in case you forgot that. I'm gonna see how you would if you've got this far, but let's just remind ourselves: assets minus liabilities, right? My assets are 100, my liabilities are 60, my equity is going to be what? 40, right? Divided by net income will give us our return on equity. Okay, now we have this advantage of this is that it is simple to compute. Okay, but there are additional ways of looking at the return on investment. And I guess DuPont, I want to say it was back in the 60s, maybe the 70s, but it's a long time ago. DuPont was a company that came up with different factors that would go into the return on equity. And so we're going to look at those factors now, starting with net profit margin. Okay, net profit margin is how are your sales contributing to your net income. Flashcard that. Again, guys, don't ask me to get too sophisticated explanation here. So we're just simply, what the ratio is. Asset turnover is going to be my sales divided by my assets. Okay. Financial leverage, and we talked about this a little bit in an earlier chapter, is going to be my assets divided by my equity. Okay. Now let's say, just going back to that example, I have assets of 100. Let's say I have liabilities, and let's say my liabilities are going to be 40. What is my equity? Not a trick question.
60.
60. Good. So I'm going to have what? 60 in the denominator here, and in the numerator, I'm going to have my assets of 100. So 100 divided by 60 is going to give me financial leverage of 1.67. Okay. Now, as we said before, financial leverage is defined as this notion of, well, if you go ahead and take on more debt, you have financial leverage. So let's say this company goes ahead and decides to take on some more debt. And so now the assets are 100, but maybe an alternative company, right? The assets are 100. I'm writing it up here, but I'm meaning it for down here's discussion. Assets are 100, but let's say now they decide to take on a little more debt. So my liabilities are going to be, and now I'm going to make the liabilities turn out to be 60 here. So now I have what? I have 100. I divide that by now my equity, which is 40. And now I come up with something like 2.5. So this entity increased its leverage by taking on more debt. Okay, and we kind of talked about that last time. Okay, good. Now you come over and you take a look, and what the DuPont formula does here is it DuPont ROE approach does is it takes those factors that we just flashcarded and just remind ourselves that that's how we would come up with the DuPont ROE, which would be to basically take our all three of those factors that we just calculated, right? Which is the net profit margin, the asset turnover, and the financial leverage, and multiply those together, and that gives you the DuPont version of the return on equity. Okay. Okay, good. Now, some more things that DuPont got into calculating: tax burden, okay, which is pretty straightforward. Net income divided by my pre-tax income. Okay, it's showing me what my tax burden is. Just definition, guys, flashcarded. Interest burden is going to be pre-tax income divided by earnings before interest and taxes. Okay, our EBIT margin is going to be to take the EBIT that we just calculated and divide that by the sales. And then the extended, what they're calling the extended now, takes all of those things that we've been talking about now and goes ahead and multiplies those together. I don't think the exam's going to get you off into a big giant calculation like that, but flashcard it just in case. Okay, okay, good. Then we come over and they go through and they calculate all those guys. And I'm just not going to put you into a coma by running you through every single one of those calculations, but you could review that so you kind of get some practice in supplying some numbers to some of those formulas. Okay, all right, good. Let's talk about residual income now. And when we start to talk about residual income, one of the big factors is there's going to be a hurdle rate. And for many companies, it's going to be the weighted average cost of capital, cost of equity, okay, or simply the return established by management. You would have to read the question, and then we're going to see to what extent we get over that hurdle rate. To the extent we exceed that hurdle rate, that will constitute residual income. We talked about weighted average cost of capital, I think, in B2 or B1, B2, I forget now, okay? But let's just go ahead and let's take a look. And our residual income is whatever our net income is minus the required return, which we just calculated up there, okay? And the required return is going to be whatever the net book value is by the hurdle rate, which again would maybe be that weighted average cost of capital, et cetera. So go ahead and flashcard that, okay, since they're calling that out as a formula. Let's just look at this, and a positive residual income indicates that, hey, yeah, this is meeting the standard. Negative indicates that performance is not meeting the standard. So flashcard that. And then let's just look at this. It's pretty, straightforward. So they give us the net income. You want to see to what extent you're exceeding that, the net income is exceeding whatever that hurdle rate is. They tell us that we have a net book value of 200,000 and the hurdle rate is 10%. So here they just gave it to us. We just sit there and we have residual income of 10,000. Okay. Now you come over and the benefits of it, and sometimes the benefit is it's easy, okay? And so go ahead and flashcard that. And that's good that it's easy, because that means if they ask us to work a problem like that on the exam, it'll be easy too, right? The weakness, let's flashcard that, and it's not scaled. Okay, so there's reduced comparability. So the use of absolute amount to compute performance distorts comparison of units with unequal size. Larger units may produce larger dollar volumes of residual income, even though their performance is identical to a smaller unit, because it's looking at to what extent you're exceeding particular hurdle rate, but we may not be, as efficient, say, a smaller unit. Okay. Okay, good. Now, another one is economic added value. Okay, and let's just take a look at the economic added value, which takes our net operating profit net operating profit after taxes, and we're calling that NOPAT. And then we get the required return, where the required return is whatever the investment is times the weighted average cost of capital. Okay, so flashcard that, but let's go ahead and let's take a look at the interpretation and flashcard that the interpretation is. The interpretation is that a positive EVA means that the performance is meeting the standard. Negative means that it is not meeting the standard. Now, you're going to have to read the question and determine how they're determining what the investment is, okay? Because it can vary by company, and so you're going to have to read the question to really understand how they're measuring, defining that investment, okay? So let's take a look at some common types of way that we will adjust our investment accordingly. And so one is to capitalize research and development. As you know, US GAAP says what? Expense all research and development. It's all expense because most research and development collapses. Advertising, expense it because you don't know whether or not for sure it has future economic benefit, etc. What they're telling you here is for EVA, the problem may say they've decided to capitalize these amounts of research and development. Well, you don't have to back those out and say, well, that's not allowed in accounting. I'm not supposed to capitalize that. No, you leave them in if the problem is told that the company has chosen to capitalize some of those. We know that we're supposed to use historical cost for our fixed assets, but maybe for economic added value, you would go ahead and use the replacement cost. Again, the trick there is reading the question carefully to see what the entity has called out that they would like to use for these measures. Okay. Okay, good. So let's just look at an example as to how we would be using EVA here to calculate something. And they come in and they tell us that the Instafab manufacturing has its investment with an investment of 300,000 after adjustment for capitalization of research and development. Now that was the only number they gave us, and so it wasn't particularly challenging here, but maybe they would give us what the amount was that capitalized, trying to trick you into thinking that, hey, maybe I need to subtract those things out if they had given you what the amounts were that were added up to get to that 300,000. They have to give me the cost of capital. They gotta give me that. That's 12% here. And so I come up with that hurdle. And then they just gave me the NOPAT, net operating profit after taxes. They just gave it to me, 50,000. There's my economic value added, my EVA. So it's really reading comprehension, following these instructions, and using these calculations for these ratio, and coming up with your residual income, all of those kinds of things. You really just have to read the question carefully. Okay. All right, good. Let's go ahead and let's take a look at a couple questions. Okay, guys. I've got a couple of people not responding. Okay, that's a little better. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's take a look. And good, most of us got this right. Okay, which is simply going to be to calculate the return on investment of these two different entities and compare them. Now, external borrowing rate might be relevant if they were trying to get us to calculate some sort of, hurdle rate or something. Here, it's not necessary. They just simply want the return on the investment, right? So for the passenger, I'm going to take what, 40,000, divide that by what, the investment of 250,000, and I come up here with an ROI of, what's that, 16%? Then I got to compare it to cargo. Cargo is 50,000 divided by the 500,000. They are generating what? Generating a 10%. Okay, so which one has the higher ROI? It is passenger at 16%. Most of us got a right, choice B. Okay. All right, good. Let's try question 2. Okay, good. Looks like we got a real nice response on this one, guys. Good work. Okay, everybody got it right, so I don't think we can ask for much more than that. Okay, but what happens? What happens if you make an investment on the last day of the current year? Well, that's going to drive up my average investment. And so what's going to happen? My return on investment is going to come down. And if I'm using what? If I'm using my investment as a hurdle rate for residual income, I've just increased that hurdle rate. So it'll also decrease my residual income. Good. Nice work. Okay. All right, good. Let's look at number 3.
Okay, guys, we're coming up on 3 minutes, which is really the maximum amount of time we should spend on any one question. I think on your exam, you would do this a little bit quicker, but than 3 minutes. But let's go ahead, and some of us didn't get a chance to try it, or at least get a choice at this point. But those that did try it, 8 of us got it correct. 1 of us wanted to choose B. So we did pretty good here. But let's go ahead and let's take a look at this. And they're asking us for the return on equity. So we know we're going to have the equity. And then we know we're going to have what? Net income or some sort of profit indicator in the numerator here. Well, you start to look at this question and they tell us that they have sales of 2 million and a profit margin of 11%. Okay, so that's telling me that my profit number is going to be, the numerator here is going to be this $2 million times this 0.11. What's that come out to? Something like 220,000. I do my math right on that?
That's what I got, yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And then for the equity, they tell me that they decided to reduce the debt ratio to 40% from 50 by selling new common stock. Well, if my debt ratio goes from 40 to 50, and I have assets sitting here of 2 million. Well, my debt minus my assets, which is the assets of 2 million here, excuse me, not 2 million, but 2,500,000. Okay, the 2,500,000, then that means that my equity is going to be what? 60% of that. If my debt is 40, then my equity is going to be 60. 2.5 times the 60 is going to give me 1,500,000 for the equity. If I'm doing that math right. And so I should get what, 14.67 out of that roughly. Choice C. Okay. Okay, let's go ahead and let's take a look at our last question for chapter 3.
You guys okay? Well, so we're at 2 minutes. I'm seeing 3 answers so far. Okay, I'll give you 15 more seconds. This one's a little more involved, so you might need a little more time. Okay, let's go ahead. That's 3 minutes. We should never spend more than 3 minutes, at least, on the exam. We should never spend more than 3 minutes. Remember, our average for questions is about 1.5 minutes. That's why I push you for some of those to work them a little more quickly, because one like this, might take you a little more time to remember what goes into economic added value, et cetera. Okay, but we did pretty good here. 82% of us, all but a couple of us got this one right, but let's go ahead and let's take a look. Okay, and so as you start to look at this one, you sit there and you say, well, look, I know I'm going to have to use the NOPAT, right? And they give me the pre-tax operating profit. They tell me that the tax rate is what? 60%. So to get the not net operating profit after tax, I'm going to have to take that 3 million and multiply it by what? 1 minus the tax rate, or 0.60. So let me write that a little better. Okay, 0.60. And so I'm going to take that 300 million times 0.60, some big numbers here. And that's going to give me my NOPAT, which is going to be 180 million. Okay, so I got that part done, but now I have to subtract off whatever the cost is going to be of this capital. And they tell me that it's 1.2, and they've divided it between debt and equity. Okay, good. So I'm going to take the 600,000, which is the half of the 1.2, 50%, and the cost of equity is 0.15. That gives me 90 million. I think what made this question hard for me is just the big numbers, right? And then 600,000, the other half of the 1.2 times the cost of the debt, now 0.05. Okay, that's going to give me this 30 million. So they're kind of coming up with a weighted average cost of capital for us here on this. And so we go ahead and we have the difference now, 180 million minus 120 million. Gives me this $60 million. The correct answer here was B, which most of you got. Okay. All right, good. So we're done with chapter 3 now. Important note about chapter 3 is don't sleep on the cost accounting. Some of these things that we talked about here towards the end are lighter point areas. I think you see that the challenge is getting the flashcards around those definitions, et cetera. And then knowing how to calculate some of those ratio that we talked about. And that'll help you with some of those questions we looked at tonight. That other stuff, okay, job order costing, process costing, how those costs go through the accounting system, using equivalent units. All of that stuff is something you're going to have to make sure that you're paying some good attention to for your exam, so that you're in good shape to pass the exam, get those points, because about 10-15 points for cost managerial accounting. Okay, question. How y'all doing? How you feeling? Tired?
Pretty good.
Pretty good? You want to jump into chapter 4, or you want to save it for next time?
Save it.
You want to think about that, Stephanie?
I'm ready to jump in.
Okay. I thought somebody said save it. I thought it was Stephanie.
Yeah, I was gonna say my reading comprehension is kind of shot sometimes this late.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I think my sense is you've got enough to keep you busy here for this week. And the other reason I'm making that call to go ahead and end class early, I want you to look at this on your own. Okay, so let's just go ahead and jump to the module 3, and I'm going to show you what and why I want you to look at it on your own. Okay, and so let's just go to full screen. And let's find that on page 25. And I think there's a way of me jumping to page 25, but I'm going to do it the old fashioned. I'm going to scroll down. Okay. And I'm asking you to look at this on your own, guys, because it starts to get in. Did I ask you this last time? I mentioned this last time, huh? Did I? No? I can't remember.
Was that auditing?
Maybe it was auditing. Michael, you're right. It's the same approach. In fact, it's the same ratio. So if you're taking auditing too, or when you take auditing, it's the same set of ratio that come up in BEC versus audit. Okay, so what they do is they give you the calculation of the ratio using the balance sheet, the income statement that they provide you. And it may be a different balance sheet and a different income statement for audit versus BEC, but the ratio are the same. So get those flashcards. I know Becker has given you the flashcards. We say given, you purchased a package that included the flashcards. So I know they have those flashcards in your package that go through all these ratio, memorize the flashcards, work the question, okay? There is a chance that they will ask you to calculate a series of ratio in a task-based simulation. So you've got to be good with these ratio, but I don't want to sit here and say, okay, current ratio, current assets divided by current liabilities. Life's too short for all of us, for that, okay? So you can look at the lecture if you want to. Most important that Becker has provided as part of the package. Most important thing is get the flashcards, memorize these ratio, don't mess with this stuff, knock these questions out, make this a strong point for you on the exam. Okay, so with that, I'll adjourn class, give you some time to relax a little bit and start thinking about how you're going to tackle that module 3. We will come in, hit the ground running on next week, Tuesday, talking about some of these other areas, with the big point value one being variance analysis. We probably won't get to that next time because it's towards the end there, but this is an area that can make or break you on the exam. So we'll be heading into that. We won't get to it probably next time, probably the time after that. Okay, question, guys? All right, good work. Keep up the good work. Do not get discouraged with the volume of material you're having to look through. I would say by now, you really should, though, have a nice rhythm as to how you're getting through this stuff. If you're still struggling with managing the workload and whatnot, we need to talk, okay? Because you really need to start moving towards that exam date. We're going to head into November here. The next time we meet, it's going to be November, right? And so we're starting to get to the short strokes here as we get ready for our exam. Okay, guys. Have a good rest of the night. I will see you next week.
Have a good
Thank you
night.
so much. Have
Thank
a
you,
good night.
Professor. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.